Chapter 1286, Son of the Lord of Heaven. The wealthy families had originally planned to hold a meeting in 7 days, but now, they realized that the Wei Wu army were traveling very quickly. They traveled over 500 kilometers per day. Everything was too sudden and they could no longer wait. Of course, if they knew that the imperial palace soldiers had left the Wei Wu army, they would panic even more. In reality, they wanted to use this meeting as a cover to do something else. Lu Shu was using the imperial dragon soldiers to attract the attention of everyone, right? The imperial dragon soldiers was like a lamp. Their travel route had been exposed to the wealthy families in the palace and other powers. But who would have thought that Lu Shu had reached the palace, and that the imperial palace soldiers had left the group? This was the reason why Lu Shu had to leave Lu Xiaoyu with the army. Lu Xiaoyu now controlled 5 masters. Not everyone could attack them, even if they wanted to. Lu Shu and Lu Xiaoyu had discussed it after Duanmu Huangqi's death and Lu Xiaoyu captured his spirit. After all, Duanmu Huangqi was the strongest person in the West region. He even had the divine power of black-white reversal. But in the end, Lu Shu changed his plan and let Lu Xiaoyu capture the spirits of the other 2 masters. After 3 days, these 2 spirits materialized from the black hole. Although they were weaker than Duanmu Huangqi, but in addition to Lu Xiaoyu, the imperial dragon soldiers would have 6 masters. There was no one who could easily injure the imperial dragon soldiers. After all, the imperial dragon soldiers were not weak either. The imperial dragon soldiers was not a typical army in the realm of cultivation. This was what the wealthy families from the palace were most afraid of. The king's studies scholars were very relaxed. To them, no matter how large the disturbance was, it would not affect them. They did not need to fight for authority. They had never provoked any officials either. They were the people who were least worried about the Wei Wu army. After all, there was no conflict of interest. To the king's scholars, no matter who eventually became the ruler, all of them had to respect the old king of gods. This was politically correct. The king's studies scholars enjoyed preferential treatment wherever they went. Some scholars even started to develop in a troublesome manner. Those who did not respect the scholars would be deemed as disrespectful towards the old king of gods. Of course, they were not particularly demanding. After all, they were also afraid of dying. While the wealthy families from the palace were discussing their problems, the king's studies scholars prepared for their own discussion. They even loudly publicized their discussion. For example, they said that a famous teacher would come, or a teacher had an important argument to present. Not only were there wealthy families in the palace, there were also sons of typical rich families. People everywhere posed as lovers of cultures. The king's studies discussion would become a grand ceremony. The civilians were slow in thought when it came to politics. No matter how their rulers clashed, or how unpredictable they were, they only found out later, or felt detached from the situation. The conflicts among the upper classes did not have much to do with them. This often happened in history. There were places where violent fights were happening, while in other prosperous cities that had never experienced war, sons of rich families were singing and visiting prostitutes. It was very normal. Thus, when the news that the West capital had been destroyed, the wealthy families from the palace panicked, but the lower and middle classes thought about whether it was time to go rowing in the Longyin River. No. More accurately, some people had started to go rowing in the Longyin River. The king's studies poetry session was held at the Peach Blossom Association. It was said that the association had obtained its name from one of the poems written by the old king of gods. I don't know where beauty has gone, but the peach blossoms still smile in the spring breeze. The owner of the Peach Blossom Association was a wealthy and high-ranking person from the palace. He did not use this status to earn money. Instead, he preferred to discuss the king's studies with scholars. In the end, a small association that did not even intend to earn money saw more and more lovers of culture gather. Every day, they lavished praises on the old king of gods. Then, they discussed their points of view and new poems. Slowly, 100 years passed. This place became the biggest association in the palace. It became the most elegant place to the civilians in the palace as well. The owner of the association did not expect this to happen. He had just done this for fun, but it became the most lucrative business in their family. Of course, the success of the Peach Garden Association could not be replicated. The old King of Gods had traveled incognito to this place and written obedient on the wall. When this was revealed, the king's studies scholars went crazy and visited this sacred site. To Lu Shu, the people who were best at currying favor with the old King of Gods were none other than the king's studies scholars. Till today, many scholars gathered outside the Peach Garden Association. Lu Shu stood by the side and happily looked at them. The scholars greeted one another when they saw other scholars. The first thing they said was a poem that included the words peach blossom. The other person would have to reply with another poem that included the words peach blossom. A poetry session became like a gathering of spies. Those who disagreed with the poems did not dare to bring it up. Furthermore, they had to say something related to peach blossoms. Lu Shu blended in. Although he had forgotten most of the poems he had learned after 2 years of training, he felt that it was enough for him to remember, but the peach blossoms still smile in the spring breeze. Many people greeted Lu Shu. Everyone would greet the person they met, whether or not they recognized them. Someone said, a cluster of peach blossoms with no owner bloom in splendor. Lu Shu replied, but the peach blossoms still smile in the spring breeze. Someone said, the mountains are filled with red peach blossoms. Lu Shu replied, but the peach blossoms still smile in the spring breeze. No matter what the other person said, Lu Shu managed to blend in with this one poem. Lu Shu had even thought about it. After greeting 2 people, he was still safe. This time, his character did not collapse as quickly. He had improved. Suddenly, a young man walked past Lu Shu. He looked at Lu Shu and smiled. But the peach blossoms still smile in the spring breeze. Lu Shu sighed. You are off track. The young man was speechless. Before the young man could react, Lu Shu had put him in the celestial map. When passers-by saw this, they thought that there was something wrong with their eyes. Furthermore, it was too crowded here and no one took any further notice. At that moment, Sun Zhongyang was doing homework in the celestial map. A young man suddenly appeared in front of him. Sun Zhongyang was excited. Can I ask you something? Brother, are you from the Luniverse? The young man was still dumbfounded. Yes, I am. What happened to the West capital? Who is the Lord of Heaven there? Sun Zhongyang asked. The West Lord of Heaven is now Sun Xuanwen. Where am I? The young man had a classic expression on his face. Who am I? Where am I? What am I doing? But when he realized that Sun Zhongyang was in front of him, he started laughing wildly. Furthermore, he suddenly felt that Sun Zhongyang looked very familiar. Wait. Aren't you Sun Zhongyang from the Sun family? You are the son of the Lord of Heaven. Chapter 1287, Appreciation of the Collection of Poems. Sun Zhongyang had made a prediction. His father, Sun Xuanwen, had a great plan. Now that he had walked through danger to stand beside Lu Shu, he would not be satisfied being a rich and bored person in the palace. But even though Sun Zhongyang was brave, he did not dare to think in the direction of the Lord of Heaven. He knew the gap between him and his father. His father, Sun Xuanwen, was truly daring and resolute. On the other hand, he was simply a young man who was slightly stronger than the other sons in the palace. But when his father became a Lord of Heaven, Sun Zhongyang suddenly felt that he did not quite understand his father. He was much more daring than he had imagined. The 4 Lords of Heaven had always possessed the most authority. Typically, the palace of the King of Gods did not use its power. Thus, the lords of heaven had the most power and influence. But now, Sun Zhongyang discovered that he had become the son of a lord of heaven. He was not like other families, where many siblings had to fight for a position. Sun Xuanwen only had one son. Sun Zhongyang had a wife, but his wife passed on early due to a strange disease. Since then, Sun Xuanwen did not marry anyone else. He only had one son, Sun Zhongyang. Sun Zhongyang was very clear that his father loved his mother deeply. He sighed with emotion. It was not easy to have a warm and affectionate family among the wealthy families in the palace. Now, he was the son of a lord of heaven. In the future, any wealthy family from the palace who wanted to do business in the West region would have to see the mood of the Sun family. In the past, they were equal. Now, the Sun family was high above the rest. This feeling was very mysterious. Sun Zhongyang told himself not to let his joy get to his head, but he was not like the officials in the palace. Sun Zhongyang turned around and looked. He suddenly realized that the 12 underlings his father had given him had knelt down on one knee. They said in unison, "Congratulations, Crown Prince." These underlings had followed Sun Xuanwen for 100 years. They knew that the Sun family would not create concubines. Thus, they could rest without worry by currying favor with Sun Zhongyang. Sun Zhongyang sighed with emotion. He now relied on his father's status. He did not know when he would be able to break free of this. When Sun Zhongyang thought about it, he waved. "Rise. Continue to do your homework. Whoever is done with their homework, help me do mine as well." He could finally be more strong-willed when he spoke. He even dared to ask others to do his homework for him. In the past, these 12 underlings were his father's trusted subordinates. He did not dare to command them before he obtained their acknowledgement. To be honest, the 12 underlings never expected that a day would come where they would help someone else do their homework. They were chief officers who were comparable to the 12 patrons. At that moment, Lu Shu walked inside the Peach Garden Association. He could already hear the loud and empty talk from inside. There were countless cushions in the waterside pavilions and visitors could choose any cushion to sit down and listen. There was a towering and distinct spot in the middle of the waterside pavilion for people to speak. Only the speaker could sit there. 3 old men sat at the speaker's spot. One of them said, "The white sun sets below the mountains. This is overanalysis. It is simply heresy. In the future, please take note of this. How could you casually taint such a beautiful poem like Farmers Planting at Noon?" An old man quickly said, "This is his argument. Old Lao, be careful when you speak." Old Lao was upset. He led the Wei Wu army and went to the palace once again. "I have to say this. He is an ignorant fellow. How dare he misinterpret the poems written by the old king of gods?" Back then, the argument that Lu Shu had put forth in the fields had spread to the palace. After all, the king's studies scholars were rather mobile. They liked to travel everywhere. As this argument slowly formed a new subdivision, everyone knew that this was the strange argument put forth by the head of the Wei Wu army. Now, the Wei Wu army was at the peak of its power. Some scholars had started to advocate this argument. Of course, many people opposed this. Someone softly said, "It is said that he is the orthodox." Nonsense. Do you think the imperial edict is fake? He is just a rebel. Hush. One of the speakers was shocked. Is this something that we can discuss? Someone laughed out loud. What are you afraid of? He has not reached the palace. Even if he is in front of me, I dare to say so. No scholars have been killed in the Luniverse. Is he not afraid that scholars will condemn him in speech and in writing? Lu Shu listened by the side. He could not understand where his confidence came from. But Lu Shu did not care about them for now. He changed the details of his appearance. He got up and walked among the crowd. Every time he walked past someone, he would give them a book. Lu Shu had asked Zhong Yutong to prepare these books before he left the earth. Back then, Zhong Yutong did not understand why Lu Shu wanted him to prepare these books. When the king's studies scholars received the books, they opened them and were dumbfounded. Something was written on the cover of the thick book. Appreciation of the collection of poems. Not only were there poems inside, there were annotations and the source of the poems. It was very detailed. When the scholars saw this, they felt that something was wrong. The binding of the book was much stronger than that of the traditional thread binding in the Luniverse. It felt like an item from another time. In reality, this was the case. It was not that traditional thread binding was not elegant. At least they could see how it was produced. But the modern binding from Earth had exceeded their imaginations. The Luniverse was not capable of such printing technology. Putting the technology aside, when they opened the book and looked at its contents, they were confused. Why was the introduction already different from what they knew? Who was Li Bai? Who was Du Fu? These poems were written by the old king of gods, right? Why had the author changed? They wanted to find Lu Shu and discuss with them, or ask about the situation. But Lu Shu was running around the place. He was nowhere to be found. Everyone could only look at the collection of poems in their hands and space out. Gradually, the three speakers realized that something was wrong. Why were the people below holding a book and spacing out? They scanned the area. After all, they were sitting at a height. It was easier for them to observe the entire situation. Thus, they saw Lu Shu, who was giving out the books. One of them was dumbfounded. He shouted at Lu Shu, "Young man, what are you doing?" Lu Shu did not care about what they said. He had to finish giving out the books. This was a gathering of the king's studies scholars. Furthermore, the most famous scholars in the Luniverse were here. As long as he destroyed their beliefs, he would not have to be afraid that he would run out of distress points, right? Lu Shu did not like benefiting at the expense of others. After all, he still had moral values. But he had invented a new way to earn distress points. It was called benefiting at his own expense. Chapter 1288, The Perfect Condition. Giving out the collection of poems was not a sure-win method. After all, the king's studies scholars could say that it was fabricated. Even if the production of the books exceeded that of the Luniverse capabilities, no matter whether it was the binding or the printing, they both exceeded the imagination of the scholars. Many people did not understand how this was possible, but were amazed nonetheless. Then, they partially believed its contents. People were like this. They had a blind trust in things they had never seen before, but seemed very impressive. Thus, Lu Shu was not worried that everyone would not believe this. But fans could not be defeated with just one item. True fans of the King of Gods would argue against even undeniable truths. All these were part of the plan that targeted the old King of Gods and the king's studies scholars. The book presented a full rejection of the poems written by the old King of Gods and his academic achievements. In general, all the poems they could think of were indicated under different sources and authors in this book. Was this accusing the old King of Gods of plagiarizing? Who was so daring as to accuse the old King of Gods? No, it was not possible. This must be slander. To Lu Shu, he did not care whether the king's studies scholars believed this. No matter what, he had to do this. In the past, who did he admire? Was it the tycoons who were very rich? No. Was it Nye Ting, who had absolute power? No. Was it Shi Xuejin, who stepped into the master realm with one step? No. He most admired the brave people who started fights with fans of mainstream celebrities. They were called such because they had many fans, right? At this moment, if someone spoke badly of them, thousands of people would surround them in minutes. Then, they would attack the perpetrator continuously. Back then, Lu Shu saw that someone had been surrounded and attacked for 1 week. He sighed with emotion, the person being attacked was so lucky. But he was not willing to provoke and hurl insults at others for no reason. If he did not even have the moral values to not do this, he did not know what kind of person he would become. There were times when evil deeds and intentions were like anthills on a dam. At first, they did not seem like much, but as they accumulated, they would cause the entire dam to collapse. Till today, Lu Shu was able to stick to his true self, not because he had high moral standards, but because he was determined enough. But now, it was different. Who was the old king of gods? He was. No matter whether it was shaming celebrities or ordinary people, Lu Shu did not want to do it. But was there any problem with shaming himself? Of course not. No matter how vast the world was anyone able to stop him from shaming himself? No. At this moment, Lu Shu did not feel any moral pressure. He even felt as if he was digging up a treasure. Lu Shu had never felt so relaxed. He even felt like laughing. Lu Shu pondered. No matter whether the old king of gods had never expected this day to come, or whether he had prepared for this in his previous life, he was very grateful that the old king of gods had painstakingly copied all the poems. No. He was thanking himself. This way, he would have less emotional burden. Thus, no matter whether the people believed that the old king of gods did not copy the poems, or whether they believed Lu Shu, they would all provide distress points for Lu Shu. Those who believed the old king of gods would think that Lu Shu was a troll who tainted the name of the old king of gods. This was like shaming mainstream celebrities. His fans would provide Lu Shu with many distress points. On the other hand, those who believed Lu Shu would provide the old king of gods with distress points. In the end, Lu Shu would also earn the points. This mysterious historical background had helped Lu Shu create the perfect condition of harming himself to benefit himself. There was a moment where Lu Shu felt that this was too perfect. If someone had not deliberately planned this, it would seem fake. Lu Shu had never encountered such an appropriate way to earn distress points. Thus, Lu Shu suspected that the old king of gods had planned this. He might have predicted that this day would come. Then, he left behind a perfect way to earn distress points for himself. Of course, Lu Shu was not planning to think about this. He only needed the King's Studies scholars to spread this information. These King's Studies scholars were like influential people on Earth. The information they spread would immediately become the center of attention in the universe. Then, Lu Shu would be able to earn enough distress points to light up the entire 6th level of Nebula and reach the 7th level. When Lu Shu thought about this, he burst with joy. The 3 speakers were furious when they saw Lu Shu laughing. "Young man, what are you laughing at?" At this moment, Lu Shu reacted and looked at them. "Don't panic. Everyone will get 1 book. I will pass it to you later." The old men were speechless. At that moment, everyone fixed their gazes upon Lu Shu. Everyone held the book and looked helplessly at one another. Someone passed the book to the 3 old men. They took a look and flew into a rage. "Boy, you are very daring. You dare to taint the name of the old king of gods? Are you not afraid that you will be punished? Someone, come and take him away. Take away all the books." Among the 3 of them, some of them were furious, while the others panicked. Those who were furious were devout fans of the old king of gods. They could not stand others tainting his name. Those who panicked were worried about their interests. They existed to analyze the poems written by the old king of gods, as well as his state of mind and thought process when he was writing. In the end, someone said that the poems were not actually written by the old king of gods. What was this called? This was called stealing their livelihood. There was no doubt that the poems were unparalleled in brilliance, but without the political background, they did not have the favor of the aristocrats. Many people started to analyze the king's studies to curry favor with the old king of gods. They were simply opportunistic. Now that these poems had nothing to do with the old king of gods, how would the king's studies scholars survive? Thus, his first reaction was to control the effect of this situation. He could not allow this to spread. But the moment the guard of the Peach Garden Association moved, he was knocked out by Lu Shu's sword energy. He was no match for Lu Shu. When the old men saw this, they were dumbfounded. "Who are you?" They had not fully understood the situation. Lu Shu was not the only one in the Luniverse who could use sword energy. There were many families who specialized in swordplay outside the sword hut. Just as Lu Shu was about to answer, there was a sudden commotion outside. It was as if people were about to charge indoors. Lu Shu suddenly had an unpleasant premonition. This was his most perfect plan. He could not possibly be cursed, right? Chapter 1289, Sealed City. At this moment, Lu Shu did not know who came over or why the person came to the Peach Blossom Association. However, Lu Shu had a premonition that someone was there to destroy his plans again. He was not over-imagining things or making things up. However, any person who was almost in despair would think about the worst outcome. A commotion started outside the Peach Blossom Association. Someone shouted, "This is the conference of the king's studies, what are you guys doing? Are you guys disrespecting the old king of gods?" This was the typical act of king's studies. Ordinary people would not dare to mess with the king's studies as after all, the old king of gods was too powerful. However, the king's studies seemed to have faced some troubles this time. A sharp voice sneered, "I have been in the palace for hundreds of years. This is the first time I have met king's studies scholars who want to frame the wealthy families." Scram. The wealthy families will use the Peach Blossom Association for today's meeting, those who are not involved should leave. At this moment, Lu Shu who was inside the palace was stunned. Didn't the wealthy families say that they wanted to meet 5 days later? Why did they bring forward the meeting by 5 days? It seemed that everyone felt the threat. After all, the soldiers of the Imperial Dragon soldiers were acting too quickly, and it was normal for everyone to fear. However, why did the wealthy families of the palace choose the Peach Blossom Association? Lu Shu suddenly realized that anyone would be worried about others acting behind their back no matter where they went. Nobody would head to other people's territory at this point in time. What if others treated them as dead weight? Therefore, it was better for them to pick a central location. The Peach Blossom Association, as the best venue in the palace, became the top choice of the wealthy families. They did not insist on holding the discussion in the Peach Blossom Association because of the environment. Instead, to the wealthy families of the palace, everything had to be the best when they headed out. This was the reputation of the wealthy families. However, unfortunately, the meeting clashed with the king's studies meeting. When Lu Shu heard the sharp voice earlier on, he was certain that the person had a managerial position in a wealthy family. At least, that person would be the manager of the backyard. So what if you are from the wealthy families of the palace? One of the king's studies scholars sneered, "You guys must be here to discuss about how to defend against the Weiwu army. You probably don't know that the leader of the Weiwu army is one of the division leaders of the King's Studies Association." When Lu Shu heard this, his face turned black immediately. They had claimed that Lu Shu dirted the King's Studies' reputation initially, but they were now using Lu Shu's name to boast to others. How shameless. However, this sentence seemed to successfully threaten the other party. Everyone in the palace knew who the wealthy families were afraid of. Therefore, they used Lu Shu's name immediately. Lu Shu was extremely annoyed by the fact that although the wealthy families of the palace were afraid of him, the King's Studies scholars dared to gossip about him right in front of him. Even though the King's Studies scholars did not know that they said those things in front of him. The manager was speechless for a while. After all, he did not keep up with the updates and hence did not know if the King's Studies scholars were lying or not, as he made it seem very real. At this moment, a deep voice was heard, "Scram like we told you to. Or else, we will kill you." After this sentence, moans of the king's studies scholars were heard. It seemed like some of them had died outside. The words of the king's studies scholars could fool and stop a manager, but not the master of the families. The wealthy families of the palace rushed in and everyone was equipped with broadswords. As compared to the weak king's studies scholars, the wealthy families of the palace exuded a charismatic aura. Prioritizing a proper education over physical education had been trending for a long time in the palace. Gradually, the cultured people had forgotten that one's power was determined by one's physical strength. The king's studies scholars who were blocking the roads were pushed away by the armed guards. Some of them fell to the ground as they were caught off guard. Lu Shu quickly distributed the books to the king's studies scholars. However, the manager saw him and was extremely displeased. "Scram, why are you distributing things here?" Lu Shu was happy. He did not expect someone to bump into him like that. The important characters of the wealthy families had entered the Peach Blossom Association. Everyone was poised and had many servants. Lu Shu saw one master sitting on a small carriage. He shot a look and a servant passed him his tobacco pipe. There was also a person holding onto an ashtray. It was extremely charismatic. Lu Shu wanted to begin with the master. However, before he could speak, many people suddenly ran into the association panting and reported to their respective masters, "Bad news, the Wei Wu army vanished. They suddenly sped up a few hours ago and disappeared after entering a valley." The master who was sitting on the carriage suddenly got angry. "Useless beings, why are you guys only reporting something that happened a few hours ago now? Where did they disappear from? They suddenly accelerated and we couldn't catch up." "Not like we caught up to them before either," the servant reported. "The people we planted along the way could see their route occasionally along the way. However, something went wrong after they entered the valley. We sent a large number of people into the valley and confirmed that they had indeed vanished. However, we are not sure how." "So where are they now?" asked the master. "Master, I don't know." The servant who was reporting was about to cry. He did not want to be the one reporting, but this was an emergency. The masters exchanged gazes and felt the abnormally tense atmosphere. Initially, everyone had calculated that the Wei Wu army would arrive the next day, but why did things suddenly speed up? Moreover, they disappeared. The disappearance was the most worrisome. For example, if one discovered a poisonous spider in one's house, it was not the scariest. The scariest thing would be the disappearance of the spider. One would not know where it went, but it was definitely in the house. Then, another group of people rushed in. They were also the servants of the wealthy families. They did not bother about their manners and shouted anxiously, "Bad news, master. The Wei Wu army appeared outside the palace and are beginning to seal the city." "What?" The master who was sitting on the carriage was shocked. "Sealing of the city? They merely rode on horses the last time, and now, they want to seal the entire city?" Chapter 1290, Kill. Sealing the city? All the masters of the wealthy families were stunned. This was extremely unbelievable as nobody had sealed the city in the history of the palace. Who dared to do that when the old king of gods was around? The palace was the center of the world's power. Countless powerful individuals gathered there. There was also an uncountable number of experts and spies. Who had the guts to seal the city? Even when the old king of gods was around, nobody dared to do that. At this moment, someone said in disbelief, "Sealing the city? How did the Wei Wu army find the courage to do this? They don't even have that many people." The vastness of the palace was beyond one's imagination. An immense amount of hard work and manpower was used to build the fortress. The size of the Wei Wu army was only 5,000, how could they seal the city? Moreover, they would not be able to seal it, right? One of the masters said anxiously, "Hold on, make it clear, how did they seal the city?" The servant said after hesitating. They charged in from the east gate and claimed that they would seal the city. Whoever dared to exit the city would be killed. The masters heaved a sigh of relief. They were merely making a claim. Someone mumbled, "The Weiwu army is really ambitious. They wanted to seal the city with only a few thousand people. What can they do if we send people out of the city right now?" The Weiwu army had indeed given the masters of the wealthy families a sense of crisis. They did not dare to face the Weiwu army, but the claim of sealing the city was way too daring. Moreover, earlier on, the wealthy families just sent off a group of their relatives. They thought that the Weiwu army was simply joking about sealing the city. "Let's hurry up and discuss how we should face the Weiwu army. They are probably coming for us. We must reach a conclusion today," said the master of the Song family calmly. He had been keeping silent for all this while and only spoke now. In fact, all the wealthy families were aware that the main disciples of the family had been sent out. The most important documents were also with those disciples. Of course, they did this out of desperation as they were afraid that the Weiwu army would be unreasonable and kill all of them. Someone said, "Even if the times have changed, we need someone to work. We, the so-called wealthy families, are merely lackeys. Why is he treating us so seriously? We won't be able to pose any threats to the change in authority. Do you really think that we are unaware of how you guys tried to kill Sun Zhongyang last year? Now, Sun Xuanwen has become the West Lord of Heaven. Think about the consequences," said the master of the Song family coldly. "It's not the peaceful season now. Stop looking at current problems with the same mindset you had in the past." Moreover, every family sent out 10,000 soldiers to attack him. "If he is really approachable, our soldiers should be safe and sound," said one of the masters. Earlier on, when the imperial edict was sent out, the entire universe was affected. Meanwhile, the destruction of the alliance army of the palace was not a secret. Everyone knew that the elite troops of the 14 wealthy families were killed and the Sun family was the only family that survived. However, they thought that their troops had died. However, Lu Shu knew that there was a group of people who were unscathed and doing their homework in the celestial map. However, Lu Shu thought that the wealthy families had a misunderstanding about the Weiwu army. The Weiwu army had already decided on how to treat them long ago. This would not change because of the attitudes of the wealthy families. Everything was destined. Li Haitan and the rest suddenly disappeared from the sight of the spies because Anthony, who was controlled by Lu Xiaoyu, had been given the ability to shift the soldiers. Lu Xiaoyu and Lu Shu had discussed this long ago. If they wanted to spring a surprise attack, they had to use Anthony's ability to move the soldiers underground. Although Anthony, as a master, did not have unlimited ability, the route taken by the elite soldiers of the Imperial Dragon soldiers coincided with Anthony's route. In this period of time, it was extremely easy for Anthony to move past several thousand kilometers underground with 5,000 soldiers. When they were on Earth, everyone was annoyed by the pervasiveness of the Earth-type metahumans. They tried to stop these Earth-type metahumans by adding different special materials under the fortresses. On Earth, the Earth-type metahuman had a new nickname long ago. Everyone liked to call them the Earth Dogs. Earth represented their abilities while the word dog was merely to scold them and express their disdain towards the Earth-type metahumans. However, the entire world did not expect them to reach the peak because of Lu Xiaoyu and Lu Shu. They were no longer satisfied with lazing around by themselves underground and brought an entire troop with them. When this troop sprung a surprise attack, nobody could defend against them. The Imperial Dragon soldiers suddenly appeared in front of the west gate of the palace and charged in. Li Haitan led the troops. His black armor that shook mountains looked extremely charismatic and powerful. The spy waiting at the gates wanted to give a tip-off, but was immediately killed by Li Haitan using his trident. The guards of the palace tried to stop the Imperial Dragon soldiers, but the hundreds of them looked as if they were kids who bumped into a chariot. In the blink of an eye, the Imperial Dragon soldiers, led by Li Haitan, killed all of the guards. The prosperous and peaceful palace was stained with blood. The scent of blood wafted from the west gate and was unstoppable. Whoever dares to leave the palace will die. Li Liang entered and said coldly. However, they did not stop at the west gate but headed in. Nobody wanted to seal this gate but nobody dared to leave. The sealing of gate did not require manpower. It depended solely on threats. Although this seemed unbelievable, nobody dared to risk their lives. Suddenly, Li Liang pointed with his finger and everyone looked towards the direction of the rest station. Then, the people around Li Heighten took out their tridents and attacked the rest station from over 10 positions. The tridents shattered the entire rest station like a bomb. When the dust settled, the villagers of the palace saw more than 10 fully armed soldiers and practitioners in the remains of the rest station. Some of them were young men. However, at this point in time, all of them were dead. Someone had sharp eyes and identified some of the young men as the outstanding disciples of the Song family. They were stuck here as they could not make it out the palace in time. The villagers froze and did not dare to move. They watched the Imperial Dragon soldiers walk into the palace like killer gods. How long had it been since such a cruel troop entered the palace?
What does it mean to be happy? 'Cause it looks like we all don't know. Glass half full or empty. Man, we just putting on a show. Try to look to the heavens.